What if everything you've been told about the tunnel of light is a lie? What if that peaceful, beautiful gateway that appears at death, the one we've been taught to trust, to follow, to surrender to without question, is actually the most sophisticated trap ever designed? I'm about to share discoveries that will completely shatter your understanding of what happens after death, connecting ancient warnings that have been hidden for thousands of years with modern near-death accounts that hospitals refuse to publish. We're talking about 2,000-year-old Gnostic texts found buried in Egyptian deserts, Tibetan monks who wrote entire manuals warning souls not to follow certain lights, indigenous shamans who teach techniques to avoid spiritual traps, and neuroscientists who've uncovered the disturbing biological mechanisms that make your dying brain create the perfect illusion, one so convincing that billions of souls might be walking into it right now without realizing they ever had another choice. This isn't just conspiracy theory or spiritual speculation. This is documented research, ancient wisdom, and testimonies from people who resisted the tunnel and lived to tell what they discovered on the other side. By the end of this video, you'll understand why that sense of urgency to go into the light might be the biggest red flag of all, why familiar faces in the tunnel could be projections or impersonations, and most importantly, how to maintain sovereignty and awareness at the most critical moment of your existence. If this information disturbs you, good, it should, because what I'm about to reveal has been deliberately kept from public knowledge for a reason. Hit that like button if you're ready to question everything you thought you knew about death, subscribe and activate notifications because this channel exposes truths that others won't touch, and drop a comment telling me, have you ever questioned why everyone sees the exact same tunnel, as if it were manufactured rather than naturally occurring? Let's discover together what they've been hiding about the tunnel of light, and why your eternal freedom might depend on learning to recognize the trap before it's too late. Deep in the Egyptian desert, in 1945, a farmer stumbled upon clay jars containing texts that had been hidden for nearly 2,000 years. These Gnostic scriptures, known as the Nag Hammadi Library, told a story that contradicts everything we've been taught about the tunnel of light. According to these ancient writings, when someone experiences near-death and sees that famous bright tunnel, they might not be heading towards salvation, they could be walking straight into a trap. The Gnostics warned about entities called archons, cosmic rulers who allegedly designed this luminous pathway as a soul recycling system, using the appearance of divine light to lure souls back into reincarnation while erasing their memories. What makes this truly unsettling is that these weren't just mystical ramblings. The texts provided detailed maps and techniques for recognizing these deceptions after death, describing how archons create convincing illusions of deceased loved ones and religious symbols tailored specifically to each person's beliefs. And here's the chilling part that modern near-death researchers avoid discussing. If these 2,000-year-old warnings are accurate, then the most comforting vision at the moment of death might actually be the most dangerous trap ever designed, and millions of souls might be following this light right now, never knowing they had another choice. While ancient texts warn about spiritual traps, neuroscientists offer a completely different explanation for the tunnel of light, and it's equally disturbing in its own way. When the brain begins to die, it releases a massive flood of DMT, the same psychedelic compound found in ayahuasca, creating what researchers call the most powerful hallucination a human can experience. Simultaneously, as oxygen levels drop and blood flow decreases, the visual cortex starts shutting down from the outside in, creating the optical illusion of a tunnel with light at the center. It's simply the last functioning part of your vision collapsing inward. Studies at the University of Kentucky found that pilots experiencing extreme G-forces, which starve the brain of oxygen, report identical tunnel visions and feelings of peace, proving this phenomenon doesn't require actual death. Add endorphins and serotonin flooding your system as a natural painkiller, and your dying brain essentially creates the perfect illusion of paradise, complete with deceased relatives pulled from your memory banks and projected as comforting hallucinations. But here's what makes scientists uncomfortable. If the tunnel of light is purely biological, why do people from cultures that have never heard of this phenomenon report the exact same experience, with the same sequence of events, the same tunnel structure, and the same urgent feeling that they must enter the light immediately? Centuries before the Gnostic texts were discovered, Tibetan monks were already writing detailed manuals warning souls about the dangers waiting after death, and the tunnel of light was at the top of their list. The Bardo Thodol, known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, describes the after-death state as a realm filled with seductive lights and illusions designed to trap consciousness into another reincarnation cycle. These ancient teachers warned that not all lights should be followed blindly. Some are described as smoky or dull lights that lead to lower realms, while others appear brilliantly attractive but are equally deceptive, designed to capture the soul before it achieves true liberation. The text specifically instructs the dying person to resist the magnetic pull toward these lights, maintaining awareness and discernment instead of surrendering to the first comforting vision that appears. What's remarkable is that Tibetan Buddhism teaches elaborate meditation practices meant to be performed while alive, training practitioners to recognize these post-death traps before they encounter them, almost like rehearsing for the most important test of your existence. But here's the question that connects ancient Tibet to modern operating rooms. If these warnings were just superstition, why do contemporary near-death experiencers report the exact same sense of urgency and magnetic compulsion that Tibetan monks described 1,000 years ago, as if something is actively trying to prevent souls from exploring other options beyond the tunnel? In 2019, a cardiac arrest patient named Sarah documented something that medical staff didn't want to discuss: what happened when she chose not to enter the tunnel of light. Near-death experience. While clinically dead for nearly 4 minutes, she described seeing the famous tunnel with its brilliant light and feeling an overwhelming pressure to move forward. But something made her pause and question why there seemed to be only one option being presented to her. Instead of surrendering to the magnetic pull, she consciously decided to turn away and explore the surrounding space, and that's when everything changed. Memories began flooding back, not from her current life, but from what appeared to be previous existences, complete with different names, faces, families, and death experiences. She described recognizing a pattern. Each time she had died before, she had followed the light without questioning, and each time her memories were wiped clean before being sent back into a new body, like a cosmic reset button. What disturbed her most was recalling the moment just before each reincarnation when she had briefly resisted, sensing something was wrong, but the figures near the tunnel had been insistent, even pushy, explaining that she had to go now and that everyone goes this way. When she returned to her body and shared this experience with researchers, they quietly archived her case without publishing it, and hospital staff discouraged her from sharing the story publicly, telling her it might upset other patients or families. But the real question is, what are they afraid people might discover if more souls start choosing to resist the tunnel and explore what else exists beyond that one illuminated pathway? There's a growing theory among researchers of consciousness that challenges everything mainstream spirituality teaches about reincarnation. What if it's not a voluntary spiritual evolution, but a forced system of soul recycling designed to keep consciousness trapped in an endless loop? The evidence starts with a disturbing pattern. Nearly every near-death experiencer reports feeling an inexplicable urgency to enter the tunnel, as if time is running out and there is no alternative, which contradicts the idea of timeless spiritual realms where souls should have infinite freedom to choose their path. Proponents of this theory point out that genuine spiritual growth shouldn't require memory erasure between lives. If we're supposed to evolve, why are we forced to start from scratch each time, making the same mistakes and relearning the same lessons like spiritual amnesia patients? The tunnel of light, in this framework, functions like a processing center where souls are convinced they're going home or toward divine love, but what they're actually entering is a system that wipes their consciousness, implants new directives, and sends them back into physical form to generate more energy through suffering, joy, fear, and every human emotion. What makes this theory particularly unsettling is how it explains the aggressive insistence from entities near the tunnel. If reincarnation were truly voluntary, why would there be such pressure, such urgency, such manufactured time limits to make a decision? And perhaps most disturbing, if you can be convinced that following the light is the only option, you'll never stop to ask what exists in the other directions, in the vast darkness surrounding that conveniently illuminated pathway where something might be waiting for souls brave enough to question the system. Long before modern near-death research existed, indigenous shamans across continents were teaching their tribes about entities they called portal guardians or gatekeepers, beings stationed at the threshold between life and death whose job is to redirect souls back into reincarnation. Amazonian shamans, North American medicine men, and African spiritual leaders share remarkably similar teachings. After death, you'll encounter beings who appear helpful, loving, even familiar, But their true purpose is to prevent souls from achieving genuine freedom by convincing them that the illuminated tunnel is the only safe path forward. These shamanic traditions teach specific techniques to maintain awareness and sovereignty after death, practices like recognizing your own energy signature, refusing to follow any being that creates fear or urgency, and most importantly, asserting your divine right to explore all available options rather than being funneled through a single predetermined route. Some traditions describe how to identify fake spirit guides by testing them with specific questions they cannot answer truthfully, or by observing whether they respect your free will or attempt to manipulate you through emotional attachment and time pressure. The shamans warn that portal guardians are masters of shapeshifting, appearing as deceased loved ones, religious figures, or spirit animals specifically designed to lower your defenses and trigger automatic trust responses based on your cultural conditioning and personal beliefs. What makes this ancient knowledge so relevant today is that it directly contradicts the "just go into the light" advice given by modern spirituality and raises a crucial question. If indigenous cultures who've practiced death preparation for thousands of years all warn about the same deceptive entities at the tunnel, why does contemporary society insist that blindly following the light is the only safe option? Emergency room doctors and ICU nurses have witnessed thousands of near-death experiences, but there's a category of reports that rarely makes it into published research or public discussion. Accounts where patients describe feeling coerced, pressured, or even threatened when they hesitated at the tunnel of light. Medical staff are trained to comfort families with peaceful narratives about loved ones going into the light, but behind closed doors, some healthcare workers admit they've heard deeply unsettling descriptions. Patients who felt they were being rushed through a process against their instincts, others who described aggressive entities demanding they move forward immediately, and some who reported a sense of being trapped in a system designed to prevent them from exploring alternative paths or simply choosing to remain in the void. These reports don't fit the comforting spiritual narrative that helps families cope with loss, so hospitals quietly discourage staff from documenting or discussing them, labeling such experiences as confusion, trauma response, or drug-induced hallucinations even when patients were clinically dead with no brain activity. One cardiac surgeon anonymously revealed that approximately 15% of successfully resuscitated patients report negative or coercive experiences with the tunnel, but these cases are systematically excluded from medical publications because they contradict the established peaceful death narrative that society desperately wants to believe. The deeper problem is institutional. If hospitals acknowledge that some near-death experiences involve manipulation or deception, it would force uncomfortable questions about what's really waiting after death, potentially causing mass psychological distress and undermining the comforting stories that help both medical staff and families process mortality. But the price of this collective denial might be billions of souls entering that tunnel without the awareness that they ever had the right to refuse. Your brain's final act might be its most elaborate deception, a chemically induced paradise so convincing that it feels more real than life itself. When death approaches, the brain triggers a massive release of endorphins, serotonin, and dopamine, the same neurochemicals responsible for the most intense euphoria humans can experience, essentially flooding your consciousness with a sense of profound peace, unconditional love, and absolute certainty that everything is exactly as it should be. This neurochemical cascade is so powerful that it overrides fear, pain, and rational questioning, which explains why near-death experiencers describe feeling completely at ease about abandoning their physical body and following mysterious lights or entities without hesitation. Their brain chemistry is literally removing their capacity for critical thinking at the exact moment they need it most. Research shows that DMT, which floods the brain at death, doesn't just create visual hallucinations, it generates deeply meaningful experiences that feel spiritually significant, making it nearly impossible to distinguish between genuine metaphysical encounters and elaborate biochemical theater produced by your dying neurons. Scientists argue that this makes perfect evolutionary sense. A brain that can anesthetize itself with bliss chemicals during the trauma of dying would be naturally selected because it reduces suffering and panic in final moments, allowing our ancestors to face death calmly rather than in terror. But here's the deeply unsettling paradox that neuroscience can't quite explain. If the tunnel of light, the feelings of divine love, and the sense of reuniting with deceased relatives are all just your brain's chemical farewell party, why do these experiences follow such specific patterns across cultures, time periods, and individual brain chemistries, and more importantly, why would evolution design a system that makes you feel urgently compelled to abandon your life and follow an illusion? Unless something else is hijacking your brain's own neurochemical mechanisms to make its trap feel absolutely irresistible? The most revolutionary idea about death might be the simplest one. You don't have to follow the script that's been written for you, and the tunnel of light is just one option among infinite possibilities that exist beyond physical existence. Consciousness researchers and spiritual practitioners from various traditions agree on a crucial point. The moment after death is when you have the most freedom you've ever experienced, liberated from physical limitations, social conditioning, and biological imperatives, but only if you recognize that freedom and consciously choose to exercise it instead of automatically following the first attractive option that presents itself. The key to maintaining sovereignty after death lies in developing spiritual discernment while you're still alive, practicing meditation to observe your thoughts without being controlled by them, questioning authority rather than blindly accepting it, and most importantly, recognizing that anything which demands immediate compliance without allowing you time to consider alternatives is usually attempting to manipulate you. Teachers of conscious dying suggest specific mental preparations, reminding yourself that genuine divine source energy respects free will absolutely, understanding that you can choose to explore the darkness or void spaces instead of the light, and knowing that you have the right to simply exist in awareness without going anywhere until you feel completely certain about your next choice. Some practitioners recommend developing a mantra or intention to carry into death, something like "I choose consciously" or "I remain sovereign and aware." That can anchor your consciousness when everything around you is designed to overwhelm your decision-making capacity with beauty, emotion, and urgency. The truth that every spiritual tradition tries to communicate, despite their different languages and metaphors, is that death is not an ending where something happens to you, but a threshold where you finally have the power to consciously choose what happens next, but only if you enter that transition with the awareness that the most convincing, comforting, urgent-seeming option might be the one specifically designed to prevent you from discovering what real freedom looks like beyond the recycling system. One of the most comforting aspects of near-death experiences, seeing deceased loved ones waiting in the light, might actually be the cruelest trick your dying brain can play on you, or worse, evidence of something deliberately manipulating your deepest emotional vulnerabilities. Neuroscientists explain that as the brain loses oxygen and begins shutting down, the temporal lobe, which stores memories and emotional associations, fires randomly and intensely, projecting stored images of people you've loved, lost, or longed to see again, creating what feels like a genuine reunion but is actually your neural network's final desperate attempt to process the trauma of dying by offering maximum emotional comfort. Studies on dying patients show that the figures people see are always culturally and personally relevant. Christians see Jesus, Hindus see Krishna, children see deceased pets, and everyone sees the specific family members whose loss affected them most deeply, which suggests these visions are pulled directly from individual memory banks rather than representing any objective spiritual reality. But here's where the scientific explanation becomes insufficient. Some near-death experiencers report that the familiar figures seemed slightly off, with subtle behavioral inconsistencies, wrong emotional tones, or information that the real person would never know or say, as if something was wearing their loved one's face like a mask without fully understanding how to replicate their personality. Even more disturbing are accounts where people recognized the deception. One woman described how her mother in the tunnel kept insisting she come immediately, but the real mother had always respected her daughter's need to make her own decisions, and that inconsistency made her pause and ultimately reject the figure, at which point it reportedly became angry and demanding before finally disappearing. Whether these familiar faces are neurological projections, spiritual impersonations, or some combination of both, the implication is chilling. The deepest love you've ever felt, the people you trust with your life, and the faces that could lower your defenses instantly, all of this can be weaponized at the moment of death to ensure you follow the light without question. Which raises one final disturbing possibility: what if the entire system counts on you being too emotionally overwhelmed to think critically when you see your beloved grandmother smiling and beckoning you forward into that beautiful, brilliant, inescapable trap? So here's what you need to take away from everything we've discussed today. Death might be the ultimate test of your awareness, discernment, and spiritual sovereignty. And the tunnel of light could be the final exam where most souls fail simply because they never knew they were being tested. The practical application isn't about living in fear of what comes next. It's about developing consciousness and critical thinking right now, while you're still alive, so that when your moment arrives, you'll have the awareness to pause, question, and choose consciously instead of automatically following the most attractive option presented to you. Start practicing meditation to observe your thoughts without being controlled by them. Question authority in your daily life instead of blindly accepting what you're told. And most importantly, remember this simple truth. Anything that respects your free will won't need to rush you, pressure you, or manipulate you with urgency and emotional triggers. Whether the tunnel is a neurological hallucination, a spiritual recycling system, or both, the answer is the same. You have the right to explore all your options, to exist in pure awareness without going anywhere, and to refuse any path that doesn't feel completely aligned with your sovereign choice. Now I want to hear from you, because your perspective matters and could help others who are grappling with these questions. If you died right now and saw the tunnel of light, would you follow it immediately? Or would you pause to explore what else exists beyond that single illuminated pathway? Have you ever had a near-death experience where something felt off about the tunnel or the figures trying to guide you? And here's the big one. If mainstream spirituality, religions, and even hospitals are all telling you to go into the light without question, what might they gain from billions of souls following the same predetermined route instead of discovering their true freedom? Drop your thoughts, experiences, and theories in the comments below. I read every single one, and your insights could be exactly what someone else needs to hear. If this video opened your eyes to possibilities you'd never considered before, smash that like button to help the algorithm show this to others who need to see it. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell, because I'm committed to exploring the truths that mainstream sources won't touch, the ancient knowledge that's been suppressed, and the questions that society tells us not to ask. Share this video with someone who's been curious about near-death experiences, or anyone who's ready to question the narratives we've all been programmed to accept without examination. Remember this, the most dangerous trap is the one that feels like salvation, and the most important freedom is the one you didn't know you had. Stay conscious, stay sovereign, and never stop questioning, especially when someone tells you there's only one way forward.